All right, today we're tackling a huge question, one that's right at the heart of this whole psychedelic renaissance. We're digging into a major scientific review that looked at years of clinical trials to get to the bottom of how these powerful compounds might actually work to heal our minds.
So here's the deal. Is that intense, sometimes life-changing psychological journey, the trip, is that the medicine itself? Or is it just a kind of weird side effect from a chemical that's doing all the real work behind the scenes? You can think of it like this. Is it like an antibiotic, where the drug just quietly does its job? Or is it more like physical therapy, where the conscious, challenging experience is the whole point?
And look, this question couldn't be hitting at a more perfect time. After being basically off-limits for decades, real scientific research into these substances is back in a big way. We're talking about serious, rigorous studies looking at psychedelics for some of the toughest mental health challenges out there, like treatment-resistant depression, addiction, and PTSD.
So, to try and figure out what's going on, researchers are really zeroing in on one key psychological mechanism that just keeps popping up in the data. And they have a very specific name for it: the mystical experience. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Mystical experience. That sounds, well, kind of fluffy, right? Not very scientific. But in this world, it's actually a clinical term, and scientists have a very precise, measurable way of defining it. So let's break down what they actually mean by that.
So what is this state of consciousness? Well, it's this specific cocktail of feelings. We're talking about a profound sense of connection to everything and everyone, a feeling that your personal ego is kind of fading into the background. That's what they call ego dissolution. And this feeling of oceanic boundlessness, where the boundary between you and the rest of the universe just seems to melt away.
Okay, which leads to the obvious next question, right? How in the world do you measure that? How do you put a number on an experience that people say is beyond words? How do you turn the ineffable into hard data?
Well, it turns out they had these carefully designed, scientifically validated questionnaires, things like the Mystical Experiences Questionnaire, or MEQ. These tools ask really specific questions to quantify things like the mystical quality of an experience, or that feeling of oceanic boundlessness. It's pretty clever, really. It's how they take a deeply personal, subjective state and turn it into data they can actually analyze.
So, great, they can measure it. But here's the million-dollar question. Does the intensity of that experience actually connect to whether or not a patient gets better? Let's get to the core findings of this massive scientific review. To get their answer, the researchers did what's called a systematic review. And this wasn't just a casual browse. As you can see from this chart, they started with a mountain of over 700 different studies and painstakingly filtered them down to just the 12 most relevant, high-quality clinical trials. This is serious, methodical science. And after analyzing those 12 core studies, which looked at everything from psilocybin to ketamine, a very clear number started to emerge. That number was 10. 10 out of 12. In 10 of the 12 studies they analyzed, they found a significant, measurable link between the intensity of the mystical experience and positive therapeutic outcomes. That is huge. It means in the vast majority of these trials, the more profound the trip, the more likely the patient was to see real, lasting benefits, like a reduction in their depression or addiction. But hold on, the story gets even more nuanced, because what the research also shows is that it's not just about having an intense experience. The quality, the actual nature of that experience turns out to be absolutely crucial. So, researchers have kind of identified two opposite poles of the psychedelic experience. On one side, you've got that oceanic boundlessness, that blissful feeling of unity and connection. But on the other, you've got something they call dread of ego dissolution, which is a deeply anxious, fearful feeling of losing control. Same drug, potentially wildly different experiences. And this is where it gets incredibly predictive. The review found that having that positive oceanic boundlessness experience was a strong predictor of healing. It was directly linked to a decrease in depressive symptoms. But on the flip side, experiencing that dread of ego dissolution, that anxiety and fear, was found to actually get in the way of a good therapeutic outcome. Okay, now, with any new frontier in science, we have to be responsible and talk about the limitations. And the researchers who wrote this review were really clear about the fact that the evidence, while promising, still has some shortcomings. For starters, most of these studies have pretty small sample sizes and they often lack diversity. A big one is that half the studies were open label, meaning everyone knew who was getting the real deal.
And let's be honest, it's incredibly tough to do a true double-blind study when the effects of one dose are, well, pretty hard to miss. That's a real challenge for researchers in this field.
And the authors of the review really sum it up perfectly themselves with this quote. This area of science is very, very new. We're really just at the beginning of understanding all of this. So after weighing all this evidence, where does that leave us with our big question? Is the trip the treatment, or is it just a side effect? Well, the powerful takeaway from this huge body of research is this. The data strongly suggests that the subjective experience is not just a side effect. It appears to be a crucial ingredient, maybe even the core mechanism that's driving the healing. The trip is the treatment. And that leaves us with a really profound, forward-looking question that's going to shape the entire future of this field. Because if the experience itself is the medicine, well, that changes everything. It means the future of this therapy isn't just about chemistry. It's about psychology, environment, and support. The great challenge now becomes, how do we design better, safer, and more reliably therapeutic experiences for people?